Yeah. We get lit, we get fly, we talk stuff, we get high. But to the masses, we just a podcast called Verified. I am your host. I am Jopaul. We are sponsored by the good people over at I'm That Jew. My good buddy Etan over in Israel. We got a whole bunch of I Am That Jew merch. Make sure you go check them out. I'll put the link in the description, in YouTube. And we have a pretty remarkable guest. And I guess the best way to start it out is I know people say that they can't believe Israel, they have a bobsled team. So without further ado, my boy AJ Edelman, he is from the Olympic Israeli bobsled team. And yes, they do have a bobsled team. Welcome to the Verified Podcast, my brother. How are you? Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Israel has a bobsled team.
Oh,
I was unaware of that. Tell me a little bit about that.
Not just a bobsled team, one of the best bobsled teams in the world. We're currently ranked third in North America. So I was an Olympian in 2018 in a sport called skeleton. It's a sister sport of bobsled. It's a head first version. I switched over to bobsled in 2020 during the lockdown, and our team's actually quite amazing. We have 4 Druze athletes, if you know who the Druze are.
Yes, we have why don't you tell the people who they are? They are other people besides besides Palestinians and Israelis that do live in Israel. Who'd have thought? Apartheid state.
So Druze are an ethnic and religious minority in Israel. There's about 2 million of them in the world, if I'm not mistaken. They have their own religion. They're ethnically Arab, but they don't consider themselves Israeli Arabs. They live a pretty difficult life for the most part, because by Jews, a lot of Jews basically view them as Arabs and with some suspicion, and Arabs hate them because they have such an allegiance to the state of Israel. So the Druze are an amazing group of people. We actually can all take some amazing inspiration from them, because there was an episode whereby some Palestinians kidnapped a Druze, I believe, or held him hostage in a hospital, and the Druze community stormed the hospital to get him back. The Druze are just an amazing group of people. If anyone has the ability to look them up, you should do so.
Yeah, I actually I've been following a very young Druze activist. I think I'm pronouncing his name Marwar Jabbar, if I'm not mistaken, and pretty remarkable individual. The fact that he stands out and stands up for what he believes, and even though in the wake of facing persecution because he is speaking very, very strongly against the radical regimes, I give him all the credit in the world. So and I got love for everyone. As long as you're not a terrorist, I fucking love you. So so that's how we do it. So what are we going to do to help our Jewish brothers out there? So, I mean, I know I've seen you on the street, answering questions and, dealing with a lot of the hard issues, because a lot of these people, where they're not indoctrinated from, actual schooling, they're indoctrinated by society. I feel like they're looking for a cause, and underneath those, masks and keffiyehs and burqas, they're really just lost kids that have no idea what it is that they're doing. And for some reason, they feel like they are jumping on the oppressed versus oppressor, bandwagon. So what are the kind of things that you faced, out there on the street, on the front line, dealing with the pro-Palestinians?
Yeah, so I've been representing Israel for 10 years now professionally, and I've been all over the world and experienced quite a few different sorts of Jew hatred and opinions on Israel. And I think at the end of the day, what a lot of Jews and Israelis essentially need to come to realize is that they hate you for existing. And so if they hate you for existing, the response
sucks.
You're not going to be able to change their mind for the most part. What you're able to do is change how you perceive things and how you approach things. So the only proper response to a hatred which hates you for merely existing, for merely breathing, is to be so profoundly proud of your own existence that it ceases to affect you and affects them far more. So it's quite funny. The worst thing for someone who hates you is to laugh in their face, right? That's the most angry that someone can get. You can see it when we saved the hostage, right? Everyone they lost their shit, right? The best thing that you can do.
Yeah, I know. I think the current death report now is 8,675 hostages, all women and children.
Yeah.
When saving 4 hostages,
Exactly.
Yeah,
but we should all take a lesson from that episode, right? We saved 4 hostages and the world lost their shit, right? The best way to combat Jew hatred is to be unabashedly, profoundly, proudly Jewish.
Amen. Amen. So what are the things? So give me an example of like I mean, we all know that, there's a lot of the talking points of the pro-Palestinians. Is there anyone that actually engaged with you with any sort of intellect or any sort of, I don't know, fact-based analysis or at least study or scholarship behind what they say? Or is it just all the buzzwords and, Israel, Israel's committing a genocide and, end the blockade and end the occupation in 75 years? And
So there, to provide some context, what I've done about 15 times or a bit more in the last 9 months is I've gone out to public spaces as the Bobsled team has traveled around. I go out to public spaces. I set up a picnic table. It has a sign on it that says, "Come debate me about Israel." Essentially, it just says Israel is a force for good. Hamas is a genocidal regime. Change my mind. There, for the most part, people don't know their facts. They know buzzwords, but there are a few who know what they perceive to be. They perceive themselves as being educated. Ultimately, it comes down, the most amount of resistance that you're going to come across are people who call themselves Palestinians. And the funny thing is that most of the Palestinians that I've ever debated have not lived in what they call Palestine, right? They've grown up as refugees and they've heard stories. And so they actually don't, if I ask them, like, when's the last time you were in the confines of the borders of what you call Palestine, a lot of them will answer, well, my family was kicked out in, X, Y, Z. They've never actually been there. The reality that we face is that Jews have to be on the ball. Like, they need to be on it when it comes to facts, because there will be certain incidences in which people can cherry pick. So they will come up with dates. They will come up with episodes. They'll come up with, it's kind of like how
the whataboutisms. That's like the new word that's come about, nowadays, is well, what about this and what about that?
But it's not even about whataboutism. It's their history. Their grievances start in the last 100 years, right? So almost everything that they'll talk about is purely the last 100 years. And they won't even know, for the most part, they won't even know about the episodes in which they have been a party to massacres of Jews. So if you talk about, they'll talk about Deir Yassin. Deir Yassin is an episode in 1948 in which the Jewish people needed to liberate the then besieged Jerusalem from the Jordanians, right? And they needed to, in order to get to Jerusalem, they needed to pass through this village, Deir Yassin, and there is a huge discrepancy between official reports and reports at the time of how many people died while passing through Deir Yassin.
And I mean, well, that was like the one episode, that conclusively you could say, okay, there was a Jewish terrorist organization, and there was only 300 members, and they did massacre, close to, 100 people. They were a little trigger happy, and when Israel declared its independence, the ones that were a party to that did stand trial. And hello, Doug, how are you? And they did stand trial, and they did face, repercussions for their actions. So, I mean, in that sense, they have every right to kind of say that, but everything else, like, I mean, you got to understand that was not the IDF. It was a small faction, and they were considered like the only Jewish terrorist organization, I guess, according to, like Benny Morris or, any of the great, new and old historians.
Completely agree, but where things kind of get muddled with things like Deir Yassin, like Jenin, like any of the other episodes which Arabs will point to signal Israeli.
Ethnic cleansing, you did it.
Right, exactly. It vastly inflated numbers, right, that have no basis in historical fact or census, and so you need to be on the ball with those numbers. But then you also need to understand the surrounding context of it. So if you tell them Jerusalem was being besieged, people were dying of starvation, right? All these other episodes, 1929, Hebron was massacred. They actually call that propaganda. They're like, that never happened, right? But you need to be able to poke holes and know your stuff. So whenever Jews ask, like, how can you go out and debate people? Aren't you nervous?
No,
Absolutely.
when you have the facts, it's like working out. It's like,
Right.
I know that I'm going to be able to do a 2.2 start from this line because I have practiced with this bobsled 6 times a day, every single day for the past God knows how many years. So when you arm yourself with the facts, there's nothing that's stronger. I mean, they may not agree with your facts and they might give you a counter, to your facts, but as long as you know what the truth is and you've learned that history properly, as well as the context behind it, then there's nothing that they really can do when you are armed with those facts, unless you just suck at delivering them, and you're like, but the Jews, they were refugees, they weren't, and then all of a sudden you get killed by the other person who might be a very, very fluent speaker and able to, really convey that messaging.
So there's also one other thing that I try to hammer home when speaking to Jews particularly, is that there's a difference between episodes and policy, right? So certain episodes have happened in the past, right? Israel shelled a US ship, right? The USS Liberty at one point. But there's a difference between the policy of a government of a people and episodes that have repercussions and discipline, right? So if Israel commits what Palestinians would call an atrocity, there's almost always an investigation and then disciplinary action, right? There was no investigation, disciplinary action to the systematic rape of our people on October 7th. That's government policy. That's policy of the Palestinian governing authority. It's policy to reward rapists, to reward terrorists, to provide a pension, right? So there's a huge difference always, and it's important to point this out in any debate that you have, of what is the system of incentives in Israel? The system of incentives in Israel is to be a good and moral citizen, right? To comport with Western values.
Western values.
Right. The system of incentives in Palestine is set up to encourage you to become a shaheed, to become a martyr. It's the best way to provide for your family. In fact,
and for context, what he's talking about for all my audience, he's talking about what's called pay for slay. It's basically a system that's put in by the Palestinian Authority, where they reward family members of the jihadists for slaying innocent civilians or Israeli soldiers. But basically, it's like, okay, yeah, here's your resume, and we're going to give you a job to go kill people, and we'll provide a pension to your family. Thanks for killing.
Right, and ultimately, every single debate I've had, there's always someone who means very well, and they'll say, do you what's the solution to all this? And there can never be a solution of peace if one people incentivize the killing of another people, right? You cannot have a system of incentive structure to kill another. There is no system of incentives for an Israeli to kill a Palestinian, none whatsoever. You're going to get thrown in jail,
right? Speaking about incentive, so my argument is that there is an actual incentive to prolong this, because a lot of people have got very, very wealthy over the course of this war. I brought up the debate, I forgot when, but UNRWA, which is an organization that's been set up since 1948 to basically only handle the Palestinian refugees, only rezoning and resettling them. And they've been getting paid from all donations and all contributions all around the world, month over month over month. And their job is only to fit these Palestinians into new homes and get them out of refugee status. So the incentive to prolong that, there's a lot of people that work for UNRWA. There's a lot of NGOs that are in Jerusalem for that cause. And if the war ends and the Palestinians are resettled, they no longer have a job. They are bankrolled by the entire world. This problem has bankrolled a lot of people and has provided a very, very nice way of living for a lot of people.
There are thousands of NGOs, but I don't even take a look at just the NGOs. Hamas exists to perpetuate conflict. That's why they exist, right? If the conflict ended, there would be no reason for Hamas to exist, right? They exist to liberate the land of Palestine from Jews. So when you take a look at why the conflict continues, for almost all of this leadership, including Fatah, including the Palestinian Authority, Yasser Arafat is a prime example of this. Their relevance, their system of enriching themselves goes away the moment there's peace. There's a lot of people who make money off of war. Inevitably, almost all of that comes from perpetuating the killing of Jews. And it's something that we need to reconcile with. And it's not something that I think a lot of Jews in the last 9 months have had a mindset of doom and gloom. Right? People are feeding off of negative energy, and it's actually somewhat problematic, because negative energy, we talk about this in sport all the time. Positive energy is a renewable energy source. Negative energy becomes exhausting. So many Jews nowadays, you can feel it. It's exhausting, right? People are really exhausting at fighting this fight, right? But if there was a positive energy source, right, your pride, your Jewish pride, I'm so proud to be Israeli, rather than, oh, those guys want to kill me. It really, really keeps you going. That's why Hatikva is so powerful. It's a powerful message of hope, right? And so Jews need to, I think, for the most part, we need to start shifting to how are we going to deal with this after this immediate war ends, right? Because we need to continue this momentum of unity. The Jews have not been so unified probably in a couple thousand years at this point, right? This is
Agreed.
the
I've said the one good thing that Hamas has done is something that the rabbis and the yeshivas and all the Jewish scholars have not been able to do in thousands of years, which is actually unite the people under one cause that has nothing to do with actual religious values. It's really about our ancient ancestral ethnic civilized culture that cannot be erased and needs to be reminded. And I always say, like, the Jewish proverb, when we meet at holidays where it's like, and we don't want to really like go through everything. All right, they tried to kill us, we survived. Let's eat.
it's
That right,
exactly right.
that has got us in trouble. That right there, because we only tell our stories somewhat in our own little settings. The world has no idea who the fuck we are, and they've painted this picture of who the Jews are, and it is not the poor refugees that have been, murdered and massacred all over Northern Europe, and they're not the white, they're not the Mizrahi or the Sephardic Jews that had already been in the land of Palestine. I mean, in the land of Israel. I'm sorry, I even said Palestine. Hashem. I'm sorry, but and they look at us in the framework of all the propaganda that's been passed down over the years, all the anti-Semitic tropes that have escalated through times. And I don't know how many times I've had to tell people, no, we do not drink the blood of Christian babies' penises, at their christening. No, we don't do that. I'm sorry. That's a blood libel from the 1600s. So people don't know who the fuck we are. And I guess, what I've tried to do is, because I have a platform that has a very, very diverse, bunch of people, and they're going to listen to me because what I say is, kind of authentic. And I've been learning this for so many years, but they have no idea who the Jews are. And I realized that 10 years ago because I didn't know who the Jews were. When somebody tried to tell me, oh, you guys were, from Spain, I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? And then I was like, oh, we were sort of, until we got expelled from there, and we were the reason that Christopher Columbus actually had the bankroll to discover America. But we'll get
So,
into that, a whole nother time.
well, so Judaism is actually at a very dangerous point right now. So Judaism and the Jewish community it's at a crossroads, and it's something that the Jewish community and Jewish leadership especially, I have a lot of issues with Jewish leadership, and I think that they have brought us particularly to this point in time. Right? The 40% of young Jews don't affiliate with any branch of Judaism, which is a very dangerous thing, because what that means is within a couple of generations, their children and grandchildren will not affiliate with Judaism at all. The unifying force, what makes you a Jew, for those 40% in large part have found their Judaism since 10:7. But the danger in that is that the world will go back to polite society. This will die down, and then things will go back. People have short memories, right? The unifying force, people cannot find their Judaism when we face a genocide, because genocidal acts are perpetrated against Jews once about every 100 years so far, right? And so Judaism faces a very dangerous situation at this point, wherein a year from now, 2 years from now, when this does settle down, what is going to happen to the community? Will it go back to being so dispersed? Will it go back to being so unaffiliated? There has to be some movement in the community to keep things unified, to keep things together. And if people were driving towards a unifying force, that should be Israel. But the problem is that the way I've seen it, I grew up around a lot of Reform Judaism, a lot of
A lot of
Reconstructionist,
secular Jews.
right? A lot of secular Judaism, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But there is an issue of the affiliation where Judaism was replaced with outward-facing activities. So almost every single one of the bar and bat mitzvahs that I went to, their bar mitzvah projects, their bat mitzvah projects, had nothing to do with the Jewish community. Building homes in El Salvador, helping immigrants, right? These are all great projects, but they're rooted in a Jewish, what they call a Jewish centerpiece of Tikkun Olam. But Judaism holds that the world can be fixed only when we fix our own community. And the Jewish community, as we've seen in the last year, last
Kind
9 months,
of broken.
is broken, right? And so this is going to fall apart again unless we discover what unifies us as Jews. And if that's not going to be Jewish heritage, of which it's being more and more lost, right? Masorah, what we used to call it, the teachings of Judaism, it has to be something that is severely unifying. And I don't see that coming together yet.
The one thing that I say now, so I mean, so I'll offer a little pushback to that. The one thing that I've seen is that through the knowledge and learning of history and really learning our history is where a lot of the unification comes from. Like 2 years ago, I mean, I'm a bad example because like I figured this out 10 years ago and started learning, and for fun I just watch documentaries about Jewish history every night before I go to sleep, and read everything I can get my hands on. So I mean, when you think about it, I mean, the Jewish story, I've said this on another podcast, it's like one gigantic Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade adventure. It's like, where the Jews going to end up in this century, in this millennium. It's like you never know. So, and I mean, it's a very, very unique story. And when you actually get a hold of your in particular story and where you came from, and know how to answer the question, where's your family from? And the first answer should not be Russia, Poland, Lithuania, Romania, Hungary. It should be Judea, via Iraq, via back to Judea. And then we went to Italy for a little bit, and then from there we went to Spain or Morocco, and we got expelled, and we had to chill, with the Arabs for a little while, but then we went up north, to Northern Europe, and then we got trapped there because there was a couple of different laws, the May laws and the Pale of Settlement, and then we were trapped in Russia, and then Poland disappeared off the map. So we're not really from there. We were just kind of dwelling there for a little bit, but backtrack, we're from Judea, and that's our story. And once people get that, then that's the unification that we need. But sometimes it needs to be smashed in their face. They don't realize it.
So I agree with you wholeheartedly, actually, on one point, and I'll provide a little bit of pushback on another. So the point of what you've just brought up is hidden in plain sight for most people. If you ask someone who's half Jewish, right, what is your lineage? They'll say something like, I'm half Italian, half Jewish, right? Why wouldn't you just say you're half Polish, right? If you believe Jews are from Europe, Jews are from Poland, then it shouldn't be half Jewish, half Italian. It should be half Italian, half Polish, right? Or half Polish Jewish. Jews are their own distinct and unique people, and we've forgotten that. But this runs into my fear and my concern, right? Which is Judaism is taught from a perspective of the past rather than the present. I think it's a very dangerous way of teaching Judaism. It's why people were so caught unaware in the last 9 months. They're shocked at the anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism exists on a spectrum. We are all on a continuum of hate, right? The Holocaust is not a historical event. It is one event as part of thousands of events that came before it. And the difficulty or the issue as how Judaism has been taught to our current generation is that it was a historical event rather than one event in a present issue, right? The present issue of Jew hatred exists because you exist, because you're a Jew, right? And so many people have thought for some reason that in the last 80 years ago, our people were nearly wiped off the face of the planet, our grandparents. And suddenly in the last 80 years, people have thought that the world suddenly has come to love Jews, right? Because we've taught our children that Holocaust, that was, how could that happen, right? As though it's a historical anomaly. It's not. It's one of many events that came before it.
I agree completely. And what I think it which is, I mean, obviously it's the actual, number, but it's something that can be quantified. And it was of an age where documentation and recorded history was very prevalent. So it's like like when the pogrom started from 1880s to the 1920s, which was 1,300 separate attacks, on Jews over the course of the 40 years. It's like there was never enough time to actually record what was going on, except for the newspaper articles, and that was very localized. There was no national news. There was no international, sharing of news. Yet, there was some networks that actually covered it, but the most quantifiable, because of the sheer body numbers and the unavoidable stench from all of the villages of all the dead Jews, it was unavoidable. But when people think that it's just, one isolated incident, no, it's just an incident that, a framework in history or like a timestamp that we can go back to and say, okay, yeah, that's when the world fucked up and they really like lost their minds and they killed a whole bunch of Jews. So from that point on, you need to treat us a little bit better because we were decimated and there were barely any Jews. I mean, people don't understand that in 1875, there was only about 6 to 10 million Jews in the entire world. So 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust. That's a quantifiable number based on when they started recording censuses and recording actual populations. So I think that's why people consider it an historic event rather than actually looking at it as a non-isolated incident and just one of many that has happened over thousands of years.
So I speak very negatively sometimes about Jewish political leadership or people in positions to affect change for this particular topic. It is the first time in recorded history in which you had easy documentation or vast amounts of documentation about the atrocities that were being committed against Jews. This is the second time, right? The second time in history and the first time that we can actually see the atrocities happening in real time and address them. The Nova exhibit in New York is the prime example. This happened 9 months ago. There's an exhibit in New York. We should all go see it to bear witness to what has happened to our people. Jewish leadership now seems to be obsessed with stopping encampments, with stopping displays of Jew hatred. I don't want those stopped. I want Jews to fight, but I don't want those stopped because I want in 10, 15, 20 years, a vast wealth of documented information that this is how the world feels. I need the Jewish people to see this in real time because this sentiment is not new. This sentiment did not suddenly sprout on October 8th. It has been festering underneath the surface. It's been boiling. Anti-Semitism is like a tea kettle. Hatred bubbles up. It steams, and then it needs a release valve. And what Israel has been, and historically,
that's a good metaphor. I call it herpes, and it's an outbreak.
So, but Israel,
because it never goes away. The water that burns in that tea kettle eventually will completely evaporate, but
right.
Herpes does not go away.
Well, so I've always said that Israel is the valve that releases the steam of anti-Semitism. People get away in polite society with saying they're anti-Zionist, they're anti-Israel. It's the release valve that allows
thing I've ever heard in my life.
Right. It's ridiculous, right? It'd kind of be like me saying, like, I don't hate left-handed people. I just hate people who write with their left hand, right? The same friggin' thing, right? But
which is weird because you used the word right and left. You said, there's people that write with their left hand.
Exactly. But this is why I want this out in the open, right? Jews need to learn to fight on their own without stifling speech. I want this speech. I want to see it, if that makes sense.
It does, because when it's out there for you, it's undeniable. There's no way that, even though there's so much documentation about the Holocaust, you still have people that deny it happened. So with more information and more documentation and more proof, it's kind of undeniable. You can't turn away from it. You can't turn away from the fact that an entire mob of pro-Palestinians or pro-Hamastinians, as I like to call them, are on the streets all day long do any of them have jobs? Any of them? Because this is just overwhelmingly it's scary to a lot of people. I have thicker skin than most. I've been in the music industry for a lot of years, and I've always been the underdog. I'm not that big of a guy, so I've had a Napoleon complex, and I've had to fight for everything that I've ever had. So there's a lot of people that are probably terrified when they see 1,000 people in keffiyehs and hijabs and burqas, burning smoke outside the Nova exhibit. It's like, these were the people that were killed, and you're justifying it by what? By an occupation that you have no idea about, a blockade that you have no idea why it was put in place, an ideology of your people that was stemmed from the 1880s through a very, very deep genocidal intent through the teachings of trying to relate religion to actual society, and which was inherent to every generation moving forward, and why they never agreed to any peace deal ever, nor would they have ever, because the only deal that they would accept, and I'm sorry if this even sounds racist, I mean, it's not, it's just based on historical fact. The only deal that they would accept is a deal where there were no Jews part of that deal.
Agreed. And it's actually one of the better parts that to come out from the overt anti-Semitism that we're seeing is it has forced Jews to defend Israel on the merits of Israel and its own existence rather than what we feel it represents to us in terms of goodness, right? So Hasbara, and I hate Hasbara, I hate that word, right? For the last 30, 40 years, the response of most Jews to you're an illegitimate white settler colonialist entity and you have no right to exist has been, well, we invented drip irrigation and the Intel chip and your cell phone and all sorts of good stuff. That has never addressed the root cause of Israel, right? The root cause of Israel is we belong there, right? We have a right to exist. And not only do we have a right to exist, Israel exists for a reason, right?
Yeah, like
and
we've
so,
been here. It's like we're
right,
here now. What up?
right. So for the last 60 plus years, I'd say, when people asked why Israel exists and someone were to say, well, with Israel, there will never be another Holocaust, the inevitable response was, yeah, but there wouldn't be another Holocaust nowadays. Well, we can clearly see that if people certainly had it their way, there would be another Holocaust, right? And so
Mhm.
this is something that has certainly been both a negative, but very much a positive. And I would encourage anyone listening to the podcast now, this should be a wake-up call to understand Israel on the merits rather than what makes us feel good. Because I have been in way too many situations, especially in the last 9 months, where the rationalization for why Israel exists and what it represents is this self-gratifying mental masturbation of like, well, we do good for the world. I don't care whether we do good for the world. I really don't. We do good for our people. That's why we exist. Israel does not exist for other people. It exists for
I
us.
felt
And
that.
right,
That touched your brother's heart right there.
right. We need to learn to take pride in that. And Jews have a historic issue of being chameleons, wanting to be assimilated to the community. They have never, in my lifetime, been so proud to say, you know what? We don't give a shit about what you think of us, right? We care about what we think of us. We fight for ourselves and no one else's acceptance. This war is a perfect example. Why is Israel kowtowing so much to public pressure? Why is it always kowtowed to public pressure? Because we feel the need to legitimize our own activities in the eyes of the world. No longer, right? We're fighting for our very freaking existence, and we need to like own up to that.
You know what I think it is, and this is probably, the people that watch my podcast that are like really deep thinkers. This is how can I put this? This is almost like PTSD of of abuse and terrorization over the course of 1,000 years that no other people has basically been able to feel. So it's almost like in our blood that we know that you don't like us, so we're going to be a certain way in public. I mean, I can tell you that more times than not, it was like my theory was go along to get along. It's like because you are the minority and you know that they don't like you, you better not get out of pocket. You better not, say the wrong thing. You have to be better than everyone else. Now it's like, if you don't like me, fuck you. It's like what? Because of my religion or my heritage is why you don't like me, because your parents were shitty parents and didn't teach you that the correct thing, that all humans should be treated fairly unless you're a terrorist, in which case go fuck yourself. I mean, I think I'd like to hope that everyone shares that sentiment, but there's motherfuckers out there protesting that are like, we are Hamas. It's like, why are you here?
Right.
Get the
But
fuck out.
I'm convinced we still have not. I think that people on the street have started to internalize the lesson. The people in positions of leadership, and when I talk about Jewish leadership, I talk about both political leadership, right? I talk about the Doug Emhoffs in the White House, talk about the ADLs, right? People in political leadership, but I also talk about financial leadership, people in our positions to affect change with their pocketbooks, and of which major donors to universities. In almost every single letter that I've read about gifts being pulled from universities had a caveat at the end. And it was until things change, right?
So it wasn't
Things
like
are
a
not
permanent.
going
So it wasn't like a permanent pullout. Like there's no going back. Like when you stop
right.
this, then we'll start donating again.
The initial gifts that were pulled from Penn, from Columbia, were always until there's a new president. The gift that Robert Kraft pulled was until things change. Things aren't changing, right? This is a systemic, embedded culture of Jew hatred, right? And Jewish leadership has been so weak for decades on this issue. One need only look at there's few members in Congress that we all acknowledge to be vicious anti-Semites right now, right? Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Jamal Bowman, they're vicious anti-Semites. What was the response when Rashida Tlaib?
They're fucking terrorists.
Right. But what was the response to Ilhan Omar tweeting out that Israel has hypnotized the world? What was the response to Rashida Tlaib saying it's all about the Benjamins when it comes to Israel and the Jews? Right? What is going on right now when endless amounts of references to AIPAC, right? AIPAC buying things, right? Jewish leadership has always been, oh, they need to go visit a Holocaust museum. They need more education. They don't understand the trope of Jews and money. Are you fucking kidding me? They don't understand the trope of Jews and money? That's the oldest trope there is, right? It would be like saying, I don't know the connection between, migrants
lungs and air.
Right. It makes no sense, but Jewish leadership has been so weak on this. It has allowed this to skate by, right? And the response from minority communities when a minority community is attacked. Let's take a look at two different communities, African American community and the LGBTQ community. If someone in Congress says something negative about the African American community, Reverend Sharpton and Reverend Jackson are on a bus the next day, leading a charge, rightfully so, for their community. Their job is to advocate on behalf of their community. They're leading a charge to talk about how wrong that is, right? Jewish people have never done that, right? No rallies, no protests, right? It's a feel-good thing. We get together, we're like, oh, we're so great. But Jewish political leadership and leadership that can move the needle has historically always looked out for, well, if we seem too Jewish, they're not going to like us. We're going to lose our position. And that really needs to change. I really hope we come out of this with better leadership. And I don't see that happening.
Well, here's a question. Who's a Jewish leader?
Jewish leaders right now, I take a look at university students, right? Because university students have been thrown into
no, I'm saying name one.
I don't know, right? I would like to say Jonathan Greenblatt.
Oh,
right?
no, the first answer was right. You can't name one. There is, besides Michael Rappaport, who's only, he's only one person and he can only move the needle so far.
Right.
We don't have Jewish leadership. I've been called by so many different people and offering to throw a whole bunch of money at me saying, Joe, you need to lead the people. You need to be a leader. And it's like, I mean, I'd love to, but it's like, we need organization. I can't do it by myself. It's like I do what I can. I know the history, I know the conflict, I know the people. I could talk to people from all walks of life, but ultimately, without a strong unification and everybody coming together behind this movement, it's like I don't know what's going to get us out of here because nobody's coming to save us this time.
What was shocking to me, I visited MIT about a month ago. Right, the MIT kids asked me to come to the table at MIT to debate people publicly. And I sat in on a lunch. There was probably 100 plus MIT kids there, and they were talking about how to respond to the illegal encampment that was set up. And this illegal encampment had been going on for months, and they were still debating with each other how to properly respond. And what was so clear and it caused me so much dismay. Jews have no centralized response. They have no leadership whatsoever. These are 18, 19, 20-year-olds leadershipless, right? The adults are nowhere to be found. Right. And so there's 10 opinions going around and there's no centralized response. Meanwhile, these encampments, very, very well
organized. Like they have the Students for Justice of Palestine, and they have the Jewish Voices of Palestine. I mean, I know it's Jewish Voices of Peace, but it's the Jewish Voices of Palestine because it's the fakest front that I've ever heard, and how they're able to actually use the Jewish name and these self-hating, self-loathing, fucking capo Jews that do not speak for us and represent the smallest minority of Jewish people that really should have their Jewishness revoked. Like we got no leadership at all, and they're completely organized, and they have adults organized behind it. They have very big, very funded, very Jew-hating organizations that are perpetrating this, and it's very, very hard for us to stop it.
And the pathetic thing is, it's not for lack of resources that we have. I heard something along the lines of UJA has raised something like $800 million or something since October 7th and spent only like 60, 70 million. Like, we have a ton of money. None of that is going to leadership training. None of that is going to debate training. None of that is going to helping the community help
You want
itself.
to you want to know why? Because the weapons capacity of Hezbollah is about 1 million rockets, and they say that they can shoot an average of 3,000 rockets every day for the next 3 months, and defending those attacks costs billions every single day that Israel does not have. The money that is that America gives to Israel is in weapons credits. It's not actual like cash. So if I had to, give an excuse of why that money isn't being spent, it's being saved for that rainy day of Hezbollah rockets that could potentially cripple Israel's infrastructure. Because can the Iron Dome sustain every single day, replenishing all of those missiles? Because it's a pretty penny. And
Yeah, we have a crisis of Jewish leadership right now, right? I believe Einstein got something like $1 billion to have free tuition for medical education for X amount of time. It's a great gift. It's really important, but is it more important than solving the educational crisis in Jewish day schools where kids can't afford to have a Jewish education because they can't afford 60 grand a year? Right? Is it
agreed.
more important than training Jewish kids to actually understand about Israel or training them to be leaders? I see no up and coming leaders in the Jewish community, well known up and coming leaders. I see Shabbos Kestenbaum. He's amazing, right? We should put some resources behind that, train him up, right? We should put resources behind young kids to
I
be
mean, my,
leaders,
my vote is for Rudy Rochman. I mean, he's a
right? Great dude, right?
yeah.
Rudy's a great dude. But the dollars are not flowing there, right? The dollars are flowing every other way. And I really do not understand why, short of the fact that Jewish leadership does not believe that Jewish leadership needs to be Jewish first. They need to be chameleons. They need to have their foot in both camps. And that it causes me great despair, great sadness.
Well, what could we do aside from? I mean, I know it sounds, I know it feels very helpless because it's like we have the great talking points. We do have some solutions. We're able to articulate it well, but what can we actually do in order to inspire that change to actually make a difference rather than like a lot of us Jews just talking about it?
So I think so what I've wanted to do for such a long time. I've tried to speak to so many people about this since October 7th. I think, there's an APAC conference, there's an AJC conference, there's all these conferences that are inherently somewhat political, right? And when you have things that are somewhat political, you have to blunt, right? You have to play towards the political position of not seeming too rah-rah. I would like to put together eventually a conference of young Jewish leaders that is unabashedly Zionist, right? To train young leaders of how to be leaders in their own communities, because what is so special about the Jewish community? The Jewish community, unlike so when Catholicism came into being, the Jewish community focuses on the home, right? It focuses on the home as the center of Jewish learning and Jewish education and Jewish continuation. Christianity focuses on the church, right? The priest had the knowledge, you went to church, that the church was where Christians unified, and the home is where Jews unified. But the home expands to the communal home as well, right? Not just one synagogue, but the community, right? That's why we
Right.
have kiddushes, it's why we have this. We need to have a conference and we need to have a concerted effort. And I believe it's very easy to put together if we have the resources to identify leaders in various communities, Northwest, Northeast, Southwest, Southeast. Identify these leaders that can go back and be real leaders of their communities, real Zionist leaders who come back and say, you know what, this is how Jews, like, this is what it means to be a proud Jew. This is how we combat things rather than some political leadership in Washington, which isn't really so proudly Jewish, some people who are really wealthy in New York City, some people in LA, right? It doesn't make sense to me that we can't put that together.
And we should be able to, because I mean, let that be a lesson to all the people that think that like Jews run the world. Like, I mean, if we ran the world, do you really think that we would be letting this shit happen right now? If we ran the media, do you really think we would be, arguing in group chats about, we got shadow banned and they're reporting us and what do we do? Like, let this be a wake-up call that maybe everything that you thought about the Jews was incorrect. All Jews born with a silver spoon? No, that silver spoon was stolen from us, and then we were kicked out of the house, and then we had nothing. When we came into the land, we were refugees. We were lucky to have shirts on our back, and we ate, sand, salads for at least the first like 5 to 10 years when settling in, the land of Palestine. So it is it is very, very frustrating, and the exhausting part of it is that I feel like we all are operating within our own little echo chambers, and only very, very few of us have like kind of like a diverse audience where it's actually our message will actually stumble upon the other side or the people that haven't thought about it. So it's very frustrating at times, and it's like I just want to bang my head against the wall when I can't figure out why these people are acting like this.
You're exactly correct. There is a lot of negative downstream effect from not having proper Jewish leadership. If you were to ask any layperson who's someone that you know who's famous and Jewish, if they're not in Hollywood, they'll mention negative names. Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, right? People like that. You make the
Or
news,
Drake.
right? If you had proper Jewish leadership the way it should be done, you wouldn't have people like Chuck Schumer who are only Jewish to bash Israel and say, as a Jew. You wouldn't have people like Bernie. You'd have people who like Joe Lieberman. Joe Lieberman was a proper and good example, but he
I
hasn't been
like
around,
Joe.
right? I like Joe Lieberman. We don't have enough Joe Liebermans. We don't have people in Congress who have a keep-on, right? Who are like, I'm a fucking Jew, right? And that's what it means to me. And so there are some very negative downstream effects.
We need a new Joan Rivers.
Right. It has very negative downstream effects, but we can cure this if we have the will to do it.
I like that. And on that note, I think we should wrap up, because that's a great sentiment to really end on, because with the will, we can do it. So if there was one thing, to wrap up that you could, I mean, if the pro-Palestinians made it this far into this interview to see if they get any gotcha aha moments, what do you want to tell them about who we are and what they could do if they have a heart left in their fucking in their soul? What could they do? What could they know about us that they should know in order to change their mind, or maybe offer some perspective?
So I can't change a hardcore Pally's mind, and that's actually something that has been drilled in from all these table discussions. I hold the debates not for the people who come to yell in my face. I hold them for the 20 people who are too scared to ask the question, who just want to listen, right? Who don't have the time to invest in understanding this. What I would tell to let's say a pro Hamas supporter, or a watermelon head that I call them, who's listening to this, is Jews are relentless. Right, Jews are really right. Everything you hate about us is actually true in some level. We're relentless, we're resourceful, we're cunning, we're smart, right? And so if you want to actually deal with the solutions of the world, you need to learn to work with that. The great thing about Jews, which has also been our weakness, is that we are somewhat chameleons. We have the ability to build bridges and to work across peoples, right? The reason you hate us, the reason you call us Europeans, is because we assimilated into Europe. Right? It's been to our detriment, but it's also been to our strength. If you want to hold on to your hatred to the end of time, you're the ones who are going to be slaughtered, right? And it's not going to be our fault. It's going to be your own damn fault. If you want a better time for your people, learn to work with the Jews, because we're the best way you're going to find success.
And we're some cool ass motherfuckers,
Yeah,
Like I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, we got our daily dose of assholes, like everyone. But for the most part, Jews, we're just happy to be alive. Like, we've only really been living for about 100 years or so. Like, we are not too far removed from the massacres that have happened to us. So once people realize that we're now out of the diaspora, and all we want to do is be able to coexist and actually live a good life like we've kind of never had. I think there was an historic 4 years of that is documented that Jews actually had no problems and were not being attacked. 4 years out of 2,000 years. I say, the one bad thing, that people don't like about the Jews is that we exist. but they're going to have to get used to it because we're here and we're really not going anywhere because of that resilience that you talked about.
There's
So
one more thing for the Jews, not for the. I want to end on speaking to the Jews rather than the watermelon heads.
let's go
But
speak to them.
if you guys want a great Jewish role model, you should watch the movie The Hebrew Hammer. So I'm nicknamed the Hebrew Hammer in my sport purely because of that movie. It's a great movie. It was a kind of a fun tongue-in-cheek thing that's about it's a Christmas Hanukkah movie, but it's great. The main character, the Hebrew Hammer, is so freaking proud to be Jewish. Watch that movie. I'm haha the bear Jew of Israel Bobsled. Be the Hebrew Hammer. The Hebrew Hammer is such a great movie. Go watch it and be the Hebrew Hammer.
There you go. I love it. I love it. So what I like to do is I like to, end off with a quote that I basically I attribute to my life. I hope you attribute it to yours, and everybody listening, I hope you attribute it to your life as well. We are all just here for a small cup of coffee. I'm just trying to drink it while it's still hot. I'm your host. I am Jopaul. We have been kicking it with AJ Edelman from the Bobsled team, a Jewish activist, a fierce individual, and somebody that I consider a very, very, very close friend, if not a Jewish brother. We are sponsored by I'm That Jew. Make sure you head over and go get all your Jewish merch and be proud of being a Jew. And remember that if you are anti-Zionist, you're a piece of shit. If you're an anti-Semitic, you're a piece of shit. If you don't love Jews, go fuck yourself. I'm your boy. I am Jopaul. This is the Verified Podcast signing off. We love you. Shabbat Shalom. You guys have a good one.